In the early 1970s, long before her name became a horror legend, a young American woman began experiencing something so strange that doctors, priests, and an entire courtroom would struggle to explain it. She wasn't a troubled girl or someone fascinated by the supernatural. She was normal, quiet, intelligent, and hopeful about her future. And yet, for reasons no one could understand, something began visiting her at night. She told her mother she felt watched, as if a pair of eyes were staring at her from the dark corners of her room. At first, her family dismissed it as stress, but the nights grew worse. Soon, she woke up with bruises on her arms and scratches across her back, marks she couldn't have made herself in her sleep. She began hearing whispers when she was alone, voices that came from behind her even when no one was in the room. Her body would freeze without warning, her muscles locking in place, her breath held by something she couldn't see. And slowly, terrifyingly, her voice began to change. By the time her family realized something unnatural was happening, it was too late. The presence had already taken hold. Her life was about to become one of the most terrifying and controversial paranormal cases in American history. One that inspired a Hollywood movie, sparked a national debate, and left behind recordings so disturbing priests refused to play them in public. Tonight, we're not talking about the film. We're talking about the real case. The case that shocked America, challenged the church, and raised a question no one could answer. Was this a medical failure or a demonic possession? This is The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And if you think you know the story, you're about to learn the part they never showed you. Before the darkness took control, Emily Rose lived a life that looked completely ordinary from the outside. She grew up in a quiet American town, surrounded by a family that cared deeply for her. She was known for her discipline, her strong faith, and her determination to create a better future for herself. She wasn't the kind of person who chased supernatural stories or believed in dramatic mysteries. If anything, she was grounded, soft-spoken, and deeply respectful of the world around her. But around her late teens, subtle changes began to creep into her life, changes so small at first that the family ignored them. Emily started having brief lapses of awareness, long empty stares where she seemed frozen between seconds. She described moments where she felt detached from her own body, as if she were watching herself from outside, unable to move or speak, like a shadow passing over her mind. Doctors initially suggested epilepsy, something that gave her family hope, because it was treatable, manageable, logical. But Emily's descriptions went far beyond medical symptoms. She began waking up trembling, her heart racing, certain that someone, or something, was standing right beside her bed. She said the air in her room turned colder at night, colder than anything she'd ever felt, even in winter. She described hearing faint footsteps circling her when she tried to sleep, footsteps that stopped the moment she opened her eyes. Soon, her personality began to change. Emily, who once prayed daily and attended church without fail, now struggled to even step inside a chapel. She told her mother that whenever she tried to pray, her mind filled with violent, intrusive thoughts that didn't feel like her own. She said it felt like a hand was closing around her throat, squeezing her words back down into her chest. She felt watched, not by a person, but by something old, something patient. Her dreams grew darker. She would wake suddenly, gasping for breath, convinced she saw faces hovering over her, faces warped, burned, twisted beyond human form. At first, she thought it was just nightmares, until the bruises began appearing. large bruises on her arms, strange scratch marks on her back, and fingerprints around her ankles that looked impossibly large. Her family grew terrified. Emily had no memory of hurting herself and no history of sleepwalking. Something else was happening. One evening, Emily confessed to her parents that she could no longer tell when she was awake or dreaming. She said she heard voices whispering her name when she was alone. At first, they whispered softly, but over time, the whispers became mocking, threatening, as if something invisible was circling her, waiting for an opportunity to break through completely. Her family, desperate and confused, brought her to physicians, psychologists, neurologists, anyone who might offer an answer. But every diagnosis failed. Medication didn't help. Therapy didn't calm her. Instead, her symptoms intensified. Emily told her mother, with tears in her eyes, that she felt followed everywhere she went, like a shadow clinging to her, suffocating her from the inside. It became clear to the family that they weren't dealing with a medical mystery anymore. They were facing something that didn't belong in the world of science. They were facing the first signs of what would soon become one of the most disturbing possession cases in American history. The first undeniable signs that something non-human was influencing Emily came quietly, almost innocently, and then escalated into events that no medical textbook could explain. It began with her sleep. Emily started waking up suddenly at exactly 3 a.m., night after night, shaking violently, her sheets drenched in sweat. She told her parents that she didn't wake up because of a nightmare. She woke up because someone was standing over her, breathing just inches from her face. But when she opened her eyes, there was nothing there. Only the feeling that something had just moved away. Soon after, Emily's voice began to change. During normal conversations, her words would suddenly dip into a lower, unfamiliar tone, as if another presence was trying to speak through her. At times, she would pause mid-sentence, her eyes unfocusing, her breathing slowing, almost as if she were slipping into a trance. Then she would snap back violently, gasping for air like she'd been underwater. Her family described these moments as being blacked out, but her body didn't fall or relax. It tensed, rigid and immovable, like something else was holding her upright. The most disturbing episodes happened when she tried to pray. Whenever she attempted to recite even the simplest prayer, her body reacted violently. Her tongue twisted, forcing her words to break apart. She gagged, coughed, and sometimes began screaming uncontrollably. She said she felt something inside her chest, squeezing her lungs, pushing the words back down. She told her mother, "It doesn't let me talk to God." This was the first time Emily hinted that whatever was affecting her wasn't just physical, it was intentional. Her behavior continued to deteriorate. Emily began avoiding mirrors, claiming she didn't trust her reflection. She said that sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, her reflection smiled when she didn't. She stopped eating because she claimed the food smelled rotten, even when freshly cooked. At night, her family heard thumping sounds coming from her room. Heavy, rhythmic, as if someone was banging their fists against the floor. When they rushed in, Emily was usually on the ground, her body twisted, her limbs contorted at unnatural angles, her eyes wide open but unseeing. The first major incident that terrified the entire family happened late one night. Emily began growling in her sleep, deep, guttural sounds that no young woman should be able to produce. When her parents rushed into her room, they found her sitting upright in bed, her body shaking violently, her fingernails digging into her palms so deeply that they drew blood. Her head slowly turned toward them, and for a brief moment, her eyes rolled back completely, showing only the whites. When she spoke, her voice wasn't her own. It was layered, distorted, and filled with rage. She said, "She is not yours anymore." From this moment on, witnesses, including neighbors, claimed they heard her scream at all hours of the night. Screams so deep and primal that they didn't sound human. Emily later said she didn't remember those nights, but she remembered the visions. She described seeing dark, charred figures standing in the corners of the room, their mouths open as if silently screaming. She said they watched her constantly, and one of them even touched her leg, leaving a burn mark that doctors couldn't explain. The turning point, the moment her family became certain that something supernatural was happening, came during a simple afternoon prayer. Emily was sitting at the dining table, her hands clasped, trying to calm herself. Suddenly, her body seized. She stood up so fast her chair toppled. Her back arched in a way no untrained human body could bend. Her jaw opened unnaturally wide, and she let out a roar that shook the windows. When she collapsed moments later, she whispered through trembling lips, "It was speaking through me." With this, her family finally understood. They weren't dealing with an illness anymore. They were dealing with something ancient, something intelligent, something that had finally made its presence known. As the days passed, the activity inside the house didn't just continue. It grew bolder, almost as if the entity had realized the family was too scared to fight back. Objects no longer shifted quietly. They slammed against walls with violent force, leaving dents in plaster and shaking the wooden floorboards. At night, the children began waking up screaming, saying someone was standing at the foot of their beds, breathing heavily. The parents tried to pray, but every time they lit a candle, it would flicker wildly and blow out as if someone had exhaled directly onto it. The air inside the house changed. It became heavier, thicker, almost suffocating, and no amount of open windows seemed to bring fresh air inside. Doors that were locked from the inside would burst open, and shadows would move across the hallway even when every light was on. Even the family dog refused to enter the house now, choosing instead to sleep outside in the cold, whining at the doorway as if warning them of something only it could see. The entity was no longer content being a silent observer. It wanted fear, it wanted chaos, and now it wanted control. The turning point came when people outside the family began experiencing the same presence. One evening, the family invited a close relative to stay with them, hoping an outsider could calm their nerves, or at least reassure them that they weren't losing their minds. But the moment the relative stepped into the house, she froze. She said the air felt charged, like walking into a room moments after a violent argument. Later that night, while she was trying to sleep in the guest room, she heard footsteps pacing directly outside her door. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps that didn't match the movement of any person she knew. When she slowly opened the door, expecting to see someone from the family, the hallway was completely empty, except for the sound of breathing right beside her ear. The next day, a neighbor reported hearing screams coming from the house at around 2 a.m., even though the entire family swore they were awake and silent at that exact time. Delivery workers refused to approach the front porch after claiming they saw a figure standing behind the curtain, even when the house was supposed to be empty. Each witness described the same thing: a dark, unmoving silhouette, too tall to be human, lingering silently as if guarding something. The consistency of these experiences confirmed a terrifying truth. This entity was not tied to the imagination of one family. It was real, aware, and now making itself known to anyone who dared come near the house. The breaking point arrived on a night that the family still refuses to fully talk about. It was close to midnight when the temperature inside the house dropped so sharply that every window fogged over from the inside. Then, without warning, Every light flickered off at the same time. The father grabbed a flashlight, but before he could turn it on, something slammed into the living room wall with such force that the entire house shook. The children began crying, huddled together on the couch, as a low rumbling sound started echoing from the basement. A sound that didn't resemble pipes, wind, or anything human. It was guttural, like a growl layered with whispers. Suddenly, the family heard footsteps coming up the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Too heavy to belong to a person. The mother screamed for everyone to run, and they sprinted out of the house barefoot and shaking. But the moment they reached the front yard, they saw something that has stayed with them forever. Through the living room window, a tall shadow moved across the wall. Not quickly, not aggressively, but calmly, as if it knew they were watching, as if it wanted them to see. The father called for help, and when authorities arrived, the house was silent, but objects inside were scattered everywhere, as if thrown around by an unseen force. That night, the family left and never returned. They didn't take clothes, documents, or even the children's toys. They just drove away, leaving the house with all the lights still flickering behind them. They later said the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was the feeling that the entity wasn't trapped inside the house. It was simply choosing to stay there. For now, when we examine this case through a strict paranormal framework, the pattern of activity points towards something far more intelligent and far more malevolent than a residual haunting. First, the entity displayed targeted behavior, choosing specific family members, especially the children, and interacting with them in ways that escalated fear. Residual hauntings do not adapt, react, or intentionally terrify, but this presence clearly responded to the family's fear, growing stronger the more chaos it created. Second, the reports of direct physical influence. Doors bursting open, objects thrown with violent force, temperature drops so extreme they fogged the windows, are indicators commonly associated with high-intensity, oppressive spirits. Third, we have multiple independent witnesses experiencing the same entity. The relative feeling breath beside her ear, neighbors hearing screams, and delivery workers seeing a tall silhouette through the curtains. Consistency from unrelated witnesses is one of the strongest markers of genuine paranormal activity. Additionally, the entity showed signs of environmental control, manipulating electricity, temperature, and sound, abilities rarely attributed to harmless spirits. Finally, the shadow figure's calm, deliberate movement in front of the family, even after they fled, suggests a level of intelligence and awareness that aligns closely with classic demonic cases. Taking all evidence into account, the final verdict leans heavily toward this being an intelligent, oppressive, non-human entity, one that wasn't bound to the house because of a tragic past, but one that chose the house as a place to manifest, dominate, and instill fear. As the family finally escaped that house, one truth became painfully clear. Some places aren't haunted because of tragedy. They're haunted because something has claimed them. Whatever walked those silent halls wasn't tied to a story, a past, or a person. It was tied to power, the kind that feeds on fear, grows in darkness, and waits for the next soul brave enough or unlucky enough to step inside. If you made it this far into the video, then you're exactly the kind of person who dives deeper than most. Someone who doesn't just watch horror, but tries to understand the truth behind it. And if you want more real cases like this, researched, explained, and told without exaggeration, then make sure you subscribe. Your support helps me uncover more of these hidden, terrifying stories from across America, and trust me, the next one I'm working on is even darker than this. So stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next haunting.